12 May 1946. Stuttgart West. In a cheap school notebook, a German civilian wrote a line he could not have spoken aloud. To keep bread on our table, I must lie about who I was. Short, dangerous, entirely true. He had been a youth leader in a movement that ended in catastrophe. He had shouted slogans and handed out leaflets. He had worn the uniform because everyone wore the uniform. That was the way he wrote it in his denazification questionnaire, Mitläufer. Follower, he underlined it. A word that could save his job. His name in the file is redacted in later copies. In this story, we will call him Karl. Stuttgart was broken. The catalogue of destruction was arithmetic, not metaphor. Allied reconnaissance photographs from March 1945 mapped the city in black and white percentages. Factory roofs gone, streets choked with masonry. In the American occupation report for Württemberg, Baden, June 1945, an inspector wrote a line that reads like a telegram: water low, coal lower, Weissing crisis total. The rubble women moved, Trümmerfrauen. They wore headscarves and men's work gloves, and they taught themselves to swing pickaxes and set bricks by eye and hand. They salvaged beams from charred roofs. They filled wire baskets and dumped them to make rubble roads for the lorries to roll on. In the Bundesarchiv photo series of the West, their backs are straight, their faces alert. There is sweat on their lips. There are missing men. A census of absence begins in June. In the local Red Cross Sachdienst office on Buchsenstrasse, 24 men and women sorted index cards with names, dates, birthplaces, last known units. They called it Nachforschungen. In his notebook on 22 June 1945, Karl wrote, "I have written to the Sachdienst for Hans." No reply. I stand in line and hear people say, "We have no news. We have news, but we do not say it." The mathematics of missing is brutal. 3 million German soldiers dead, millions of civilian dead, millions of displaced. Counting depends on papers. Papers depend on survivors. The Americans entered the city on 21 April. They issued curfew orders at 9 in the evening and banned gatherings in the square. They posted guards at crossings, then loosening, then tightening. The first American trucks handed out tins of meat and bars of soap to lines of women and children. Later, the occupation reports add cautionary words, civilian fraternization to be discouraged. The Americans did not come as conquerors, the report said. They came to keep order, deliver food, dismantle factories as reparations, and reorganize schools. Behind the typed lines, the fear of retribution, of rape, of sudden searches. Fear that moves with the curfew siren and lies down with the candles guttering at 10. A British observer visited Stuttgart in July 1945 and wrote a private note in a file held now in the National Archives. "They look at us, and we look at them," he wrote. "We hold rifles. They hold ration cards. The first summer was hunger, but the first winter had a name. Hunger Winter. 1946 to 1947. The arithmetic of calories was written in chalk on shop doors, then erased when the delivery failed to arrive. A normal worker needed 3,000 calories. Rations in the US zone fell to 1,000. The exchange rate of hunger moved daily: 1 cigarette for 2 eggs, 5 cigarettes for a kilogram of potatoes, a whole carton for a worn bicycle tire. To forget hunger, a woman in Stuttgart said in an oral history recorded in 1981, "We smoked more than we talked." The 1946 ration book in Stuttgart allowed 30–40 grams of fat per month. Fat was life. Fat was power. For 6 months, the trickle of lorries from the countryside decided who could stand upright in the morning. In the Killersberg market, Karl traded his wedding suit for a sack of barley. He wrote that down. He wrote it as confession. He called the black market by its polite name, Der Tosh. The exchange. The police reports noted it in euphemisms too. Unregistered transactions, they said. The mathematics of survival was unsentimental. Every human life in a city of ruins was a currency problem. How to convert anything, pride, furniture, a confession, into bread. The Allied orders hung on doors. No travel without permits, no radios without inspection, no newspapers except those licensed by the military governments. Neue Zeitung, the American-sponsored paper, arrived with a manifesto for re-education. It published photographs from Buchenwald and Dachau, victims, corpses, survivors with eyes like crater lakes. It published poems by writers who had been banned. It published instructions for the questionnaire that would separate Germans into categories: Hauptschuldige, Belastet, Mitläufer, Entlastet, Mitläufer, Entlastet, major offenders, offenders, lesser offenders, followers, exonerated, 5 boxes, 1 nation, 1 box for every person with a past. The questionnaire had 131 questions. It asked where you studied, whom you had married, what you had read, which clubs you had joined. It asked about the SA, the SS, the NSDAP, the NSV. It asked if you had donated money, if you had signed petitions, if you had been promoted. It asked about guilty knowledge without using the word guilt. An American intelligence summary from late 1945 estimated that 8.5 million Germans had been NSDAP members. The process of denazification, the summary said, will be vast and will necessarily be imperfect. The mathematics of guilt had to be made into procedure. The procedure had to become bureaucracy. The bureaucracy had to become absolution. Karl filled in his form at a desk in a room with 2 other men. He gave his birth year as 1911. He listed a factory apprenticeship, then war work, then a posting to a flak unit late in the war. He wrote no to the SS, no to the SA. He wrote yes to the Hitlerjugend leadership, but added 3 words in the margins: Pflicht, nicht Glaube, duty, not belief. In a later interview, his daughter would say, "He told us that as a boy he had loved the hikes and the songs. He told the Americans that he had detested the politics." 2 versions. 1 man. The Spruchkammer, the arbitration panel, heard his case in October 1946. The room was restrained. The judges sat behind a table made from 2 doors laid on trestles. The clerks had carbon paper and a tin of ink. A translator leaned in to catch the words. The transcripts that survive show their cadence. I did not know. I did not decide. I was required. Over and over I followed orders. A witness from his workshop spoke for him. He was reliable, the witness said. He did not denounce anyone. A woman he had once loved submitted a written statement. She did not show up in person. He is not a bad man, she wrote. He is weak. The panel classified him as Mitläufer, the arithmetic of guilt, a fine equivalent to 2 months' wages, and a note in a file. He walked out with a certificate that he could present to a hiring desk. It said he was permitted to work in his profession. The numbers of denazification are public now. In the American zone, 3.5 million cases processed by the end of 1949. 5% classified as Belastet, 4% as Minder Belastet. The rest? Mitläufer and Entlastet. A mathematics of accommodation. The pressure of reconstruction bore down. The pressure of reconstruction bore down. To staff schools, offices, factories, you needed men and women who had taught, filed, supervised. You needed the people who had done it before. The system needed stability more than thorough justice. A sentence from a U.S. occupation report in 1947 says it boldly: "If we remove all Nazis from positions of responsibility, we remove all competence." History does not forgive such sentences, it does record them. Between the denazification files and the Hunger Winter, The city filled up with strangers, expellees they were called, Vertriebene, pushed from the east. A tide of trains rolled into the stations in early 1946 from Silesia, East Prussia, the Sudetenland. The Potsdam Conference had approved population transfers. The approval did not make them less brutal. The arithmetic of displacement is almost too large to speak aloud. 12 million, perhaps 14 million Germans forced westward by the autumn of 1947, a few thousand arriving each week in Württemberg-Baden. The local authorities had to find rooms in a city without rooms. The housing office in Stuttgart took census of beds. It sent men to knock on doors. 2 rooms? Give 1. 3? Give 1.5. The office issued Zuweisungen, compulsory assignments. A note nailed to a door meant someone would be sleeping in your hallway next week. Karl wrote, "We took a family from Breslau, 2 children. The boy had a glass eye. He hates us." The tension between locals and newcomers was a function of square meters. The arithmetic of scarce rooms produced anger in units of curses, fists, and locked doors at night. Oral histories of both groups remember slights. Locals called the expellees Polacken, even when they were German. Expellees said locals kept the good coal and sent them the wed. The city file on housing conflicts, expellees, fills a folder as thick as a fist. Other camps formed on the edges. Camps for displaced persons, DPs. This category included Jews who had survived the camps, forced laborers from Poland and Ukraine, Italians who had been prisoners, and Russians who would not go home. Near Ludwigsburg, in a barracks ringed with wire, a DP camp housed several hundred Jewish survivors. An Allied liaison wrote in January 1946, "The German population reports that these camps are places of luxury. They are not." He listed the facts: tin stoves, food from UNRRR, guards to keep Germans out as much as to keep residents in. A woman in the camp sent a letter to a cousin in New York. It was intercepted, then copied, then filed. It reads, "We are alive. That is more than I thought possible. They do not want to look at us. We do not want to look at them." Occasionally, the lines crossed. On a market day in 1947, a group of Jewish DPs came into town to buy shoes with cigarettes. Karl saw the numbers tattooed on a man's arm. He wrote, "I had not seen this before. I had not known." Then a line he scratched out in the notebook so hard the paper tore, "I had not wanted to know." The difference between not knowing and not wanting to know is the mathematics of shame. It accumulates interest as the years pass. Newspapers carried the Dachau trials, and then Nuremberg. Photographs stacked like crimes. Germans read them in the tram, folded them on their laps, and then spoke about bombings, expulsion, loss. "We were victims too," was the sentence that organized the emptiest rooms in the mind, and also the true rooms of grief. Allied intelligence noted the pattern. The average German civilian admires the efficient conduct of the trials, but resents them. He prefers to speak of suffering inflicted by the war upon his family. The reporter in a swaying tram recorded a conversation. A woman describing her husband burned in his shelter in 1944. An old man describing his farm seized in 1946. The arithmetic of pain is not zero-sum. It was lived as if it were. Fuel was numbers too. Coal trains. That winter, coal froze on the open wagons in the yard. Men with pickaxes had to break it apart to feed the boilers. Office workers in Stuttgart wore coats and hats at their desks and warmed their hands on tea. "We stand around the stove in our coats," Karl wrote. "We look like a painting of Russian peasants." He went to work at a machine factory near Feuerbach. The building had been bombed in October 1944. By the summer of 1946, the walls had been rebuilt with bricks that still smelled like fire. The Americans had seized some of the machine tools in May 1945 and shipped them to France and the United States. What remained was enough. They made axles for trucks again. They made pistons. They made tools to make other tools. A union organizer came to the factory in late 1946. He had been in exile in Zurich. He wore a hat and carried no briefcase. He put a leaflet on the company board, IG Metal meeting on Saturday. The factory director allowed it. The Americans approved. The third space after curfew became a room where men and women sat silently at first, while a voice said words that had been dangerous before. You have rights. You have a voice. In the minutes of that meeting, preserved in a union archive, someone wrote, "No enthusiasm, some fear." One man cried. Carl signed his name for the committee. It was an act of alignment as much as belief. He knew that if he was on a list, he would be on a safer list. This is the arithmetic of the new democracy. If you joined the union, you could be counted as a builder of the new order. If you sat on a works council, you could be seen as someone who had moved. If you helped organize a canteen for the lunch hour, you were a little less likely to be told to leave. On 5 June 1947, the American Secretary of State announced a plan in a speech at Harvard. In newspapers in the American zone, it was headline news, Marshall Plan. It delivered more than cargo. It delivered a story of a Germany rehabilitated not through punishment, but through work. By late 1948, the cargo arrived in Bremen, sacks of flour stamped USA, crates of powdered eggs, steel for factories. The monthly newsletter of the Stuttgart machine plant printed photographs of the bags being unloaded. ERP flour became Wunderbrot in jokes. The mathematics of calories improved. The arithmetic of hope changed. And then the mathematics changed overnight. 20. June 1948. Currency reform. The Deutsche Mark. Karl stood in line outside a school and received his 40 Deutsche Marks counted into his palm. People had slept on their old Reichsmarks. People had wrapped their old notes around their bodies like extra clothes. In the afternoon after the reform, shop windows filled with goods that had been kept in the back. Sugar, soap, shoes. On the black market, a cigarette fell from 3 marks to 1, then to nothing. We walked down the Königstrasse and watched a queue form outside a shop, Karl wrote. People were laughing like drunkards. The day is remembered in hundreds of stories with almost religious clarity, the moment when the arithmetic of scarcity moved from panic to possibility. It did not end hunger. It did not end hunger. It did not end injustice. It did allow a plan. The Berlin blockade began in June 1948. It made the air belong to geopolitics. The American planes flew overhead in and out, and children learned to count the rhythm of cargo by sound. In Stuttgart, the Cold War entered at eye level when a local policeman asked the union organizer if he had ever been a member of the Communist Party. No, the organizer said. The Americans asked again. The union put a note in the minutes. We do not permit communist agitation in this committee. The mathematics of the Cold War mapped onto the mathematics of denazification. Men who had been classified as Mitläufer could become administrators. Men who had been social democrats and anti-Nazis were told to remove comrades who were too far left. The new order wanted stability. Stability had an arithmetic of its own. An occupation report from late 1948 by an American officer stationed in Stuttgart reads like a ledger summary of an entire life. Factory production up 23% over 1947. Attendance at political education classes down 12%. Fraternization controls loosened. Food distribution improved. Tension with expellees continues. Denazification caseload diminishing. General mood, cautious optimism. General morality, questionable. The last line is subjective. but it is an attempt to measure not only what people do, but what they are trying to forget while they do it. At home, the school books changed. The first look-back curriculum in Württemberg-Baden in 1947 said that the German people had been misled, and that the lesson was to avoid extremism. The chapter on 1933 to 1945 was 10 pages. The chapter on Goethe was 20. There was a danger in dilution. There was a danger in rage. When teachers in 1948 discussed the past with their classes, they used the passive voice. Mistakes were made. Terrible things occurred. The explicit perpetrators had names in newspapers, but not in the classroom. The focus fell on bombings, expulsion, and hunger. The focus fell where the pain fell on the people in the room. On Sundays, public commemoration adapted. In 1949, Stuttgart unveiled a memorial for the dead of the air raids. It is clean, set in stone, with an inscription, Den Toten der Heimat, to the dead of the homeland. The memorial for murdered Jews was not built there then. The names of deported neighbors were not read aloud. In a small Lutheran church in the north of the city, the pastor preached on reconciliation, mercy, and work. In his margins, he wrote, "Be specific," then crossed it out. In early 1949, Karl became a union representative for the machine hall. He wrote the minutes in clear block letters. He asked management for better boots for the men on the lathe line. He requested an extra loaf delivery for the canteen on Thursdays. He negotiated the winter bonus as if it were his own money. He listened to a worker describe his frost-bitten fingers and wrote, "We insist." He kept a file on his desk labeled Cases Personal that contained denazification certificates. He kept another labeled Housing Emergency. Between them, a pencil worn to the eraser. People came to his desk with forms. He looked at the forms and then at the faces. The arithmetic of humanity is a pencil you keep sharpening against paper you cannot throw away. In 1950, he married a widow. She had 2 children with blunt haircuts and wide foreheads. In their first summer together, they went to a lake near Böblingen and took a photograph standing in bright light with shadows like drawings. The lake and the photograph and the ability to go outside without thinking of rubble felt like a miracle. He thought less about the camp near Ludwigsburg, but it did not go away. At night, sometimes, a number flashed on his eyelid like a fault in a machine. By 1951, policies that had seemed unthinkable in 1945 were normal. The Bundestag passed Article 31, the law permitting certain former Nazi civil servants to be reinstated in the civil service. The denominator was stability. Administration required administrators. The numerator was experience. People knew how to file forms and process pensions. The usher of the law wore judicial robes. It made a category. It opened a path. The mathematics of guilt tilted again. In the office where he organized his notes, Karl placed a clipped column from a newspaper that read, Die Stunde Null ist ein Mythos. The 0 hour is a myth. It argued that there had been no clean break in 1945. The past ran through the present like a rebar through a concrete wall. He underlined a sentence, "We must look at what we built upon." Looking is a verb that implies a subject and an object. He did not always feel like a subject. He felt, often, like a sight.